Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 6th of October of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. The Russians and the Ukrainians continue attacking each other with missiles and drones. The Ukrainians are saying that during the previous 24 hours the Russians attacked Ukraine with 116 drones. This is not the biggest number, obviously, and the Ukrainians are saying that they managed to bring down 83 drones of them. During the previous 24 hours, we also received lots of videos and geolocations of what exactly the Russians were attacking. For example, in this video, we can see how Russian drone was flying above Kalinovka, a key fuel and logistic hubs in Ukraine, and this territory was affected by Russian drones. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians attacked another substation in the Chernihiv Oblast in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Ichnia. Here we can see a short video when civilians were trying to film the flying of Russian drone and the attack on this substation. Furthermore, the Russians attacked the southern part of Ukraine. This time the Russians attacked the Yuzhny oil terminal in the Odessa region, so very important terminal that Ukrainians use also for military purposes. But most likely the biggest strikes and the biggest attacks took place in the area of the city by the name of Zaporizhzhia. During the previous 24 hours we received lots of videos from this area, and this is one of them, and according to this video, as we can see, something big and something important was destroyed. We can see a black smoke screen above the city of Odessa. Most likely the Russians destroyed fuel depot or something like this. During the day we received lots of videos from different angles. Furthermore, the Russians attacked the city of Kharkiv. As for the city of Kharkiv, the Russians attacked this area because Ukrainians used HIMARS missiles and HIMARS systems to attack in the direction of the city of Belgorod. In this video, we can see the HIMARS missiles that were flying in the direction of the city of Belgorod. As a result of this attack, the Ukrainians managed to damage the Russian power plant, and according to information we have, the power outages were recorded in this area. Furthermore, the Ukrainians attacked the Bryansk Oblast. As for this area, the Ukrainians were attacking the energy facilities. Later, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported about the number of drones that were involved in this massive attack, and the Russians are saying that during the previous 24 hours they managed to bring down 251 drones of the armed forces of Ukraine. Most of them were destroyed in the area of Crimea, the second place for the Kursk region, then the Belgorod region. So as you can see, the Ukrainians also launched a massive drone attack all over the entire territory of the Russian Federation, and some of the attacks were successful, at least when talking about the Crimea, the pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian resources that Ukrainians managed to get, some oil and fuel facilities in this area. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation on the ground. And first let's talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. And today, probably since the beginning of the Zaporizhzhia offensive operation, we have received one of the most important pieces of news. Today, according to information we have, according to neutral mappers, according to pro-Ukraine resources, and according to pro-Russian resources, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to break through Ukrainian defense in the southern fortified area. We're talking about the Poltavka fortified area, and to enter its western part. So this is obviously a very interesting piece of news. So for example, this is the map that was published by pro-Ukraine resources. As for this map, we see that there is just the eastern part of the fortified area under complete Russian control. Most of the territory is under complete Ukraine control. There is a very huge gray zone, but today pro-Russian resources several hours ago reported that as a result of this attack, the Russians secured completely the eastern part of the Poltavka fortified area. Furthermore, the Russians managed to cross the river Voyanchul and to establish complete control over the central part of the city of this fortified area. As of now, we haven't received anything. We are talking about videos that can confirm this, but we believe that if this information is correct, in coming days we're gonna get lots of very interesting updates and we will color. So basically, basically the battle, the decisive part of the battle for the Poltavka fortified area has begun. The Russians managed to make the most important part to cross the river of Yanchul and to dig in deeper into in the central part, which means that now they will finish the battle for the southern part of the settlement, and then they will start moving further in the northwestern direction until they get the settlement of Okhotnichye. Then Russians will start fighting for dense network of the fortifications between Poltavka fortified area and the Uspenovka fortified area, and then the battle for Uspenovka will begin. If Ukrainians, as we discussed in the previous videos, lose control over these two fortified areas, this is going to be a complete disaster for the armed forces of Ukraine, and basically right after the end of the battle for these fortified areas, most likely in months, the Ukrainians will lose control over the city of Gulay-Polye, which is one of the most powerful stronghold in the entire Zaporizhzhia direction. With the fall of Gulay-Polye, I will not be surprised that within months the Russians will be able to get the outskirts of the city of Zaporizhzhia. The Ukrainians are trying to stabilize the situation, and during the previous 24 hours they began their own counterattacks on the positions of the 29th and 36th armies of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. During the day we received lots of videos of how Ukrainians were trying to introduce additional forces along the line of combat contact with the purpose to counterattack Russian positions to force them to fall back, but Ukrainians suffered huge losses. It seems that Ukrainians waste a lot of very important time, and now basically they have no time for stabilization. The Russians managed to dig in deeper, the Russians managed to bring additional forces, the Russians managed to regroup, and basically now the Russians are ready for everything. The Russians captured one of the most important and fortified defense areas, and now they will use this dense network of fortifications against Ukrainians. And now Ukrainians are forced to counterattack on these positions they lost during the first stage of the Russian offensive, and obviously this is going to be a very difficult job for them. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction, where the situation for the Ukrainians continue worsening. Today we got a report that the Russians finished the battle for the southeastern part and for the southern parts of the city of Pokrovsk completely. So I would like to remind you that the Russian offensive operation in this area started somewhere on the 2nd of October. At least starting from the 2nd of October, we began receiving more and more updates about significant progress on the ground from the Russian side. So let's take a look at the map. This is the situation by the end of the 2nd of October. This is the moment when everything started. This is the situation by the end of the 3rd of October. The Russians managed to encircle the southern micro districts and the southern stronghold. By the end of the 4th of October of 2025, the Russians secured up to 50% of this territory. By the end of the 5th of October, the Russians improved their positions in the Shakhtarsky micro-district, and by the end of the 6th of October, the Russians finished the battle for this territory. This information today was provided by pro-Russian resources. Of course, we are waiting for geolocations, we are waiting for anything that can confirm this information, but if this is true, if this is a correct information, obviously the Ukrainians lost the battle for the city of Pokrovsk. Most likely they will try to show some resistance in the central part or in the eastern part, but it's just a matter of time when the Russians will be able to secure this. Furthermore, right before we started making this video, we got another very important update, probably even more important than this one, about the situation in the southeastern part. Today, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to cross the railways in the western part of the city of Pokrovsk and to enter the industrial zone that is located in the northwestern part of the city, the most important part of the city. If you remember, we discussed the situation many times, and I told you that if Russians were able to establish control over this industrial zone, this is going to be the beginning of complete collapse of the entire Pokrovsk defense operation from the Ukrainian side. As of now, we haven't added anything to map. It's just reports and different maybe speculations. Let's wait for a few more hours, and if this information is being confirmed, then we will adjust the map and we will discuss the situation during the next video. Now let's move further and let's talk about the situation in the area of breakthrough. There are very heavy clashes for this territory, and during the previous 24 hours we got lots of changes. the Russians most likely are blocked on the territory of Dorozhny settlement. So this village was captured by Russians several days ago, and right after the Russians captured these territories, the Ukrainians began their counter-offensive operation, their counterattacks. Ukrainians were using Bradleys and tanks for these purposes. And today, this morning, several neutral mappers colored the settlement of Dorozhny under complete Russian control. So let's discuss everything in details. The Ukrainians began their counterattacks a few days ago. And for example, we have videos of these counterattacks. This is the situation. Let's increase the number of updates. So the Ukrainians began their counterattacks somewhere on the 2nd of October using Bradley fighting vehicles. And if you remember, we discussed the situation. The Ukrainians managed to outflank the settlement of Dorozhny and to capture positions behind the settlement with the purpose to cut supply and support of the Russian contingent on the territory of this small town along the railways. But which means that most likely by the time when Ukrainians were outflanking Russians, the Russians were still there. So the Ukrainians managed to encircle the Russians. And today the Ukrainians made another attempt to break through the Russian defense area in this town. They sent a tank. The tank managed to cross railways. Most likely the Ukrainian tank was trying to prepare the offensive road for further offensive groups of the armed forces of Ukraine. But Russians managed to discover the tank and they began bombing the tank with FPV drones. And as a result of this attack, the tank was completely destroyed. So we see that this facility is under siege. The Russians control the situation and the Ukrainians are sending more and more troops and forces with the purpose to restore control over the territory. This is very important village or town for Ukrainians because according to information we have today, the Russians managed to recapture the village of Zaporizhzhia, so this settlement, and the Russians managed to recapture this village just because the supply and support of the Ukrainian contingent on the territory of this village went through the settlement of Dorozhny, and due to the fact that the Russians were controlling this supply road, the Ukrainians were without any supply in this area, and as we can see, under the pressure of the Russian forces, they were forced to fall back and they left the settlement. So the Russian mission in the area of Dorozhny was completed successful, as we can see. Now the Russians will try to unblock their contingent on the territory of the settlement and to maintain the lines between the settlements of Rodinska, Sukhetska, Zatishek, Zapovedne, and Dorozhny itself. So we see that every single day the Russians are improving their positions in the area of breakthrough. Now the Russians control the initiative in their hands. We're not saying that the situation is developing completely in the Russian favor. We can say that currently the situation is like 60 to 40 in the Russian favor. The Ukrainians most likely are losing the battle for the area of breakthrough. Telling the truth, I would like to see what the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Syrsky, is going to tell about this, because if you remember, during the previous weeks he was talking that he managed to encircle thousands of Russians in this area, that Russians suffered huge losses, that the Ukrainians were about to achieve this victory, and now we see completely opposite picture to the situation that was described by the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine. So let's wait and see, of course, what is going to be next. Now let's talk about the Sieversk-Liman direction. The Russians continue their offensive operation. The news around the city of Sieversk is tightening. We see that the Russian offensive operation to the south of the city is gaining momentum. During just previous 20 days, the Russians captured 3 villages. The village of Kuzminovka was captured by Russians yesterday, and today we got geolocation and video that can confirm this. Furthermore, the Russians during the previous 20 days captured the village of Perezhny and the settlement of Fedorovka. All these villages, all these updates were confirmed by geolocations, by videos, by reliable sources. Now we see that the Russians most likely will try to continue offensive operation further towards the road between the settlements of Svyatopokrovsk and Alexandrovka. This is the only road, normal road, if we can call this road a normal one, that Ukrainians have to support their contingent on the territory of Sieversk. If Russians can cut this road physically, this is going to be the end for the city of Siversk itself. During the previous 24 hours, we got videos how Russians were attacking bridges and roads in the northwestern part of the city, trying to reduce the quality of Ukrainian logistic. So the battle for the city of Siversk is ongoing, but we see that the initiative is in Russian hands. Now let's talk about the northern directions. Today we got report from the northeastern part of the Kharkiv Oblast. Today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that as a result of intensive and resolute actions, the units of the group of forces north managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Odradne. Based on this report, we haven't adjusted anything because we adjusted this territory a long time ago based on geolocations we have. Today we got the real confirmation of the Minister of Defense, and we have this video where we can see the Russian flag in the central part of the settlement, which is another proof of Russian control over the territory. So the settlement was taken, and now the Russians will start moving further. Furthermore, according to information we have, the situation is becoming very difficult in the area of the city of Volchansk. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of videos of how Russians were bombing the settlement of Vilcha. So the settlement of Vilcha is the next fortified area of the armed forces of Ukraine after the settlement of Volchansk. If Russians lose the city, if the Russians take under control the city of Volchansk, they will start moving further in the direction of the settlement, and after the village of Volcha, the Russians will enter an operational space almost until the settlement of Bely Kolodez. And that's it for today. Military vs. Samurai channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.